Hi, Jeff here. Just saw this post here on is code switching an indicator for bad leadership? And it goes on to explain a post from a CEO in the United States, originally from India, and went on to talk about code switching. And this interests me specifically because my doctoral work was on code mixing and code switching. Um, so I spent a lot of time doing interviews and analyzing data and writing a final, long thesis on that topic, and doing interviews on it and getting information from different sources, trying to identify loan words, and then doing interviews and trying to identify code switching contexts, code mixing contexts actually, and then trying to determine the types of code mixing was happening. So I want to kind of go over this. I don't know how much time it's going to take to do it. I don't have a list of points I'm walking through. I'm just thinking about how this, from experience in life, family, work in different countries, and what I've seen, how this could apply to this kind of situation here. So the first thing to do is kind of make a difference between code switching and code mixing. I think that's a really important thing to clarify. Code switching is changing from one language to another language at sentence breaks. So after a sentence, a full sentence, or a paragraph, there can be a switch to another language, and that can go on for one sentence or more, and it can kind of switch back. So the idea of like that is I'm just speaking like I said English here, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to decide to switch to French. Et maintenant, on va commencer à parler en français avec certains points comme ça. And then we're going to come back to English. So what I did is I gave an idea of code switching here. Code mixing is using usually what's called loan words, not always loan words, but let's call them loan words that are borrowed words from one language and another. So you'll have one language here, and I'll be speaking English. And I might decide I'm going to say, well, we're going to do touche, and then I come back to. So the word touche came from French, but I might have to, something, or we're going to eat some hors d'oeuvre this evening, right? So, or something. I'm going to use a term or a word in another language and bring it into another from another language, bring it to this language and using it. So that's what code mixing is. Now, you can have different levels of this, and I've seen it a lot of work, but I'll go ahead and I kind of want to give an examples at home, in home context where I've used this a lot, seen it used a lot, and not just home, but let's say in non-working environments at work. So where does code switching happen? More code switching happens a lot at work in the restaurant, the company restaurant, and at coffee breaks. That's where code switching happens, where people would switch from one language to another, usually with the people from the language they want to identify with. And then they'll switch back if they have to talk to someone else, or if they want to say something specific. Code switching happens there. And it happens a lot at the lunch table. These people switch back and forth depending on the topic. But it'll be sentence level, paragraph level, right? If we want to call that utterance level, not word level. Now, and it can happen in the workplace as well, where if I go up to an English speaker, because I would speak to them in English, I'm going to say it in English, right? But I might flip over and talk to a French speaker and then come back. It kind of depends, right? And that's not a problem used at work because people understand English. That's not really a big problem. People accept that. Happens a lot too. But it happens in families a lot, especially in hybrid mixed families. That was my situation. I married a French girl, and I took her to the United States, and she learned English in the States. And then when we came back, when we had children, we decided that her English was pretty good. My French was. We had always spoken French together, so we decided to keep French as our language of communication between us at home. Yeah, and then we'd speak to the kids in each of our language. It's called one parent, one language. That's what it is. And so the kids, and then we decide also that the screen time, all screen time could be when the kids were small was video cassettes, but then DVDs and then games and and then computers. That everything had to be in English, had to be configured to be in English so that they'd have more English input because they're getting plenty of French input. That wasn't the problem. So that's the kind of, and what happened was the kids got older. I'd even speak to kids in English in the playground, so I'd be speaking to them. But if someone didn't understand something or somebody made a kind of funny look, I'd code switch over to French, speak a sentence or two, say what's going on, and then code switch back. Right? That's switching. Code switching happened on the dinner table or whatever. It was like linguistic gymnastics at home, code switching, and code mixing. And now I'm finding as the kids have gotten older, they still they still respond to me in French. They still speak to me in French, but they'll sometimes put some words in their English because they know their English pretty well. And now I will sometimes not know what I'm language I'm speaking, and I don't think about it. Right? It just comes out for at that point in time. And sometimes I'll speak to them in French, and then I'll flip over to switch over to English when I realize I'm doing. But then it doesn't really matter. I can speak to them in English, right, or in French. It doesn't really matter. So that kind of happened over a change of time over their age. And a lot of it came from identity too. The kids were, when they were teenagers, a little more sensitive to their identity. So they didn't want me to be speaking English to them around their friends. So a lot of that factors come into play. And I'm mentioning all these factors because these are the things you're going to see in the workplace, right? This is a normal thing in families that are multilingual. So it just going through it. But when you bring it to the workplace, that's another situation. So I want to kind of mention all these things as I'm bringing it over to talking about code switching, code mixing in the workplace. One of the things that you'll see now, code switching, we're giving examples of when code switching happens, lunchtimes, coffee breaks, maybe seeing colleagues of their same native language. I've seen too when they're playing music together because we go to bands and stuff, so we can that code mixing, code switching happens a lot. That happens a lot. People are just switching back and forth, and they'll just choose the language they want to speak in. So it doesn't matter; everybody can understand. And that's code switching can actually happen. People will speak in the language that's comfortable with them, and then everyone understands, and so everybody's speaking the language comfortable. So the code switching is happening in the conversation, but it's not one person that's code switching. It's everyone's code switching back and forth because everyone understands the 2 or 3 languages, right? That happens too. It's a really interesting kind of situation as well. Code mixing, however, happens a lot more, and I've seen it mainly. I see it a lot in the company I work for because we English is a language that we speak and write, except for pure customer business matters in France or speaking with colleagues and everything. We speak in French together, but we write everything in English because you're going to eventually have to get it in English anyways. That's going to see, except for the French Workers Council and the workers unions and all that. And all the meetings got to be in French. So, or it's going to get lawsuits. So the code mixing, what happens is people will be speaking in French and they'll drop a word in, right, and then have it back. And I see colleagues doing this on the TV when they're interviewed with journalists, or they'll do it in like big all employee meetings or in big town meetings or in town hall meetings, big employee meetings, all employee meetings, whatever you call these things. And they'll drop in words that do exist in French. There's a French equivalent. And the French equivalent might actually be the same number of syllables. Usually code mixing people will do it to save time on number of syllables pronounced. But I've seen it where it doesn't really matter the number of syllables pronounced. It can be equal. But there might be times where people want to make it look like they speak English a little bit more than they do. Or they're trying to sound cool, on the TV. But that kind of bothers me in the fact that on the French TV, I don't find it really appropriate to use loan words in English if the French equivalent actually does work. And I use the French ones. I've been spending years last 20 years, the last 35 years living in France, I've spent 20 years trying to not speak English, having all the French equivalents, just so people, will accept it and it sounds native, right? I don't need to be approved or make it feel like it is anymore, but it's something of just not trying to, oh, you're using that word because you're a native speaker. No, I know the French equivalents too. So but the code mixing can happen for these other variables, right? Identity, want to look cool, want to seem like you speak it better than that. That makes distinctions, right? And now as we bring it over to the article, that was someone from India living in the United States, a manager, and speaking a language, flipping over it. Now, I don't recall if I said it was code mixing or code switching, right? Because that would make a difference here. If it's code mixing, that work can happen stuff. It's probably code switching, because for that kind of language, what we could call less widely used language or minority language, we want to make it just simple. But that's not the words that we can use are politically correct right now. So low data languages, to sound really technical. There are anywhere from, India, I've heard claims anywhere from, 17 to 30 national languages that are official. There's a range of them. It kind of depends. Probably in the state that you're in India. And there are so many dialects. I mean, there's anywhere from 700 to 3,000 dialects. So depending on how you organize them and categorize them, right? That's how you group them together. So I don't want to go into a big debate of the number there are, but there's plenty of statistics there. You can look at it. But what you'll see and you can find is that those languages are usually ethnically based, geographically based, and religiously based, depending on the factors where they're at. So there's a lot of languages, these vernacular languages, that people will use in certain contexts, but not in other contexts. So, and a lot of people in India do speak 2 or 3 different dialects, depending on, English, maybe Hindi, and another local language that they grew up in. This is Hindi in school and English in school, depending on where you're at and the region and all that. So there's a lot of factors. I don't want to go into all the details of this, but take that now and take it over to the United States, where the Indians from India, they come to work. They're going to usually want to speak English, unless they want to identify with their ethnic group for some reason and try to identify them. Now, that's fine if you're doing it in some situations, but you got to be careful when you do it, and you don't want to try to make a favor one over another, because that can be kind of a problem. I get some issues. And you don't want to make a favoritism over one dialect over another. That can get around issues. That can get to ethnic rivalry, or ethnic rivalry, and that could lead to some problems because they're not. See, these aren't like 2 major languages like English and French. They're both, UNESCO level, United Nations level languages. So there's not any competition in the French field. There's competition from English. The Olympics right now, the French Olympics is showing that. But these other languages, like the Indian languages, there's a lot of background to that, and people want to be, there's a lot of dealing with being able to make it through and survive, and some of these dialects will be more useful than others to make some economic advantage. But it's identifying with people and you feeling what you identify with. So what I would say is, in this kind of context, the best thing to do is just listen and to get a feel what people are with it. And like I've done with my kids over time, I don't force them to have to listen to me in English anymore. If they want to speak in French, we'll speak in French. If I feel like I want to speak in English, they understand it. If there are certain topics that I feel fine to speak with them in French, we'll do it. I mean, and I can speak with them on any topic. It's just sometimes I just feel that we can keep going in French. It won't matter. And that's what I'd say for these type of situations is be careful, just kind of watch, observe, and try to do things that are not going to make social disruption in working with people, because that can just cause other conflicts. You don't need that always. And you don't want to get to the point where you're having political correct, statements and all that. And you want to get fighting over the whole D&I, diversity inclusion topic. It's just not worth it. It's really not worth dealing with that. So, does it create bad leaders? I don't think so. I think it kind of depends on the people, their personalities, how they do things. And those leaders have to be careful how they use the language, the choice of language, to influence or dissuade or whatever they want to do with it. That's just have to be careful in the choice, because it can send a message or a different message depending on what they're getting at. Code mixing in the code switching situation. Code mixing is just dropping a word here and there. It's not that bad, but depending on who you're with, right? And if they know the words or not. So, just look around and determine that based on the situation and adjust it. You need to adjust, you adjust it. So those are my thoughts on it from a bit of experience on the topic. Thanks so much.